Hello and welcome to my cursed little corner of the internet. Today's video is a two-part collaboration with another YouTuber, which is something that I've always wanted to do. But there'll be some more on that later. What you do need to know is that I was given 3 words: occult, mystical, and gold. So I got to building. I found some grapes that were on clearance for $5 and proceeded to pull them all off. And I wanted to test out some new things that I'd never done before, which is actually sculpting with clay. I've never used a high quality clay, so after making some tentacles, I started doing some paint tests on the grapes. They're kind of a rubbery plastic material, so they didn't hold paint very well. But when I used special effect paint for blood, it gave a really cool effect. So I went ahead and got to work. I mentioned this was a collaboration with another YouTuber. If you've seen this guy, his PermaDeath vlog inspired a lot of people to start making hobby vlogs, including this guy. And I really genuinely liked his content and the stuff that he was making, so I reached out to him and asked him if he wanted to do a collaboration. And we both thought, what would be better than something that is using the PermaDeath miniature, because my YouTube channel was reignited from that and his was started from that. So I started working on this miniature display diorama based off of the 3 words that he'd given me. In the spirit of the PermaDeath vlog and just having a crack at it, I tried to do a lot of techniques that I'd never done before. So I originally wanted to kind of sculpt figures of women into this door, and that was a little too ambitious for my first project. And like Mother Teresa once said, everyone would rather look at a wet, fleshy wall with eyeballs on it. Please subscribe. For the other side of the door, I wanted to integrate some of the occult aspects. The only real occult thing that I know of is John Dee and the Sigillum DMF. Typically, I think this symbol is supposed to be carved into wax that you've rendered from the fat of your enemies, but if you're not a murderous psychopath, then clay will do. And the idea behind this was supposed to be that our little hero or villain had done a ritual that opened up this seal, and behind it was either forbidden or lost knowledge, kind of like you're trying to open the doors of truth, and then behind it actually just turned out to be something that you didn't want to see, in this case being a portal to a Cthulhu-like dimension. In order to carve the symbols and actually work with this sigil without it falling apart, I partially cured the clay with a heat gun, and then I was able to carve into it. Because it cured unevenly, there were spots that were much easier to carve into than others, so the details don't look as good on some parts as the others. It was overall a pretty frustrating detail to make, knowing that it was going to be facing outward and almost never seen, but I was kind of thinking about how woodworking people just gush about pieces of furniture that are finished on all sides. But even more so than that, this detail I feel like helps tell much more of a story than just being random doors. And especially if it's something that you're aware of, if you like occult things, it's kind of a cool little Easter egg. So the doors, just as clay, were far too thin, and this is going to be going to Berlin, and I'm in the United States, so I don't think that those thin doors would survive the trip. So I bulked them out with a bit of foam. I had recently purchased this verdigris effect, and I was really dying to use it, and I think I did something wrong with it, or I didn't mix it enough, because as soon as it went down it was just very goopy, but you can remove this with some alcohol, so I was able to salvage it. I painted the tentacles up with a mixture of purple and black speed paint, and then I went on to painting the door. So I saw a new technique from the Grimdark Compendium called the glue technique. So I started by basing the door with a light fleshy tone and then doing some purplish pinkish highlights on the edge, and then what you do is you coat it in super glue. Super glue makes a protective barrier where you can now start to apply alcohol to your top layers. So after that's down and dried, I went ahead and started adding a black wash, and you can see where I'm dabbing on the alcohol, it kind of spiders out and makes this really cool veiny looking effect. This allows you to build up multiple layers and continuously correct your mistakes. So after you have a layer that looks the way you want it to, then you apply a new layer of glue, and then you continuously add, and that's how I built up these cool looking fleshy tones. After I glued the clay to the styrofoam doors, there was a big gap that was very ugly. So I went ahead and got some green stuff, rolled it out into a giant worm, and then wrapped it around the entire outside of the doors. Then I used some sculpting tools to kind of blend it together. This stuff is a lot harder to work with, but it's still pretty forgiving if you're using these tools. I glued all of our little friends in place in the doorway, and then went ahead and coated them in UV resin mixed with some red ink. The red ink adds a bit of an extra layer of depth to the color and also gives that wet look. For the base, I found a pretty cool looking flower pot mold on Amazon, and I wanted to cast this out of plaster. When doing this, I knew that it was going to have to survive a long trip, so I replaced all of the water with Mod Podge instead. After letting it cure for about 24 hours, I tried to demold it and it started crumbling apart, and I decided to just roll with it instead of recasting it. For the top piece, I wanted to have the floor be golden bricks or golden stones. To do this, I used really thin XPS foam that I could then texture with some of the leftover plaster chunks, so not all was lost. Once I mapped out all the tiles and glued them in place, I then made a kind of a grout out of plaster and sand with a little bit of glue and put that in between. I based everything with Mod Podge and black paint so nothing would be loose, and then I started to paint everything white. I wanted to paint the tiles white first so that the gold would show through somewhat bright, and then I could do the weathering on top rather than on the bottom. Also, in testing out putting the doorway down, I realized with the position that I had placed some of the tentacles, it was actually touching the ground in a way that I didn't originally plan. So in order to combat this, I used some 1-inch tiles that kind of look like a staircase, and I had some leftover faces, right? You know, we all just got some of those laying around. These were from a stone face texture roller that I had gotten so I could make some things for Kingdom Death that I never actually ended up using. And I had a lot of test sample pieces of clay that I had done it on, and a lot of these have their details very obscured, so I wanted to just take the ones that showed through really well. I glued them onto the stairs and then I painted them with the Vallejo metallic paint. I really like using this for something that's detailed because unlike a lot of the other metallic paints that are kind of goopy, this one's really thin and flows very well, so it didn't obscure any of the details. Originally, I was going to leave the back of the doorway exposed and open because I thought it might look kind of cool, but the actual hot glue that was holding everything together looked terrible, so I just painted up a piece of cardstock black and then put some black resin over the top. I did an extremely simple paint job on the base. I didn't want to go too hard with this because it wasn't something that I felt like I had actually made. It was just a mold that I had cast, so I didn't want it to be much of the focal point. So I just painted it with gray, and then I used a black wash and just put it on the edges and allowed gravity to kind of just draw that down. For the base that I had cut out, it actually fit inside the main chamber of the flower pot. So I wanted to fill this up with a bit of bricks to give it a little bit more depth. And then I coated the filler with black sealing wax that I had that fits into a high temperature hot glue gun. I really liked the way this looked, so I decided to add some additional details to the base, and then it's very strong, so I also used it to seal up some cracks on the back. After that, it was just a matter of assembling everything together. I ended up just gluing everything together with the sealing wax because the black looked much better than the actual hot glue. And that pretty much wraps it up. But before we go on to the glamour shots, a word from our sponsor. Do you find yourself gazing into the abyss only to feel like it's not gazing back? Then we have the solution for you. Try Cthulhu. Give yourself to the void. Allow your entire existence to be consumed. Drop your Nietzschean philosophy and stop trying to be like the Ubermensch. Allow everything you know to be completely consumed into the void. Try Cthulhu today. I am truly excited that I get a chance to collaborate with White Star. I feel like I've always seen people on YouTube doing cool projects and working together, and I've always wanted to be a part of that. And I decided that I'm just gonna make that happen, or at least try to. And when I reached out to him, he was super awesome, positive, and receptive to the idea, and he's been along with me for every step of the build. So go over to his channel and subscribe. Once he gets this piece, he's going to be posting his video of his painting process for the model that's going to be displayed on this piece, and together we can see if it survives the trip to Berlin or if it arrives in pieces.
Anyways, be sure to like and subscribe, drop a comment for the algorithm. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.